that they're going to explore, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So first I would like to say that we need to have the capacity to think critically and comprehensively about all elements which compose the current school system in America, whether it's public, charter, private, or parochial, so that we develop a broad-based approach to reform in education. It behooves us to be critical of the histories and policies of schools, of teachers and teachers unions, of educational organizations, of municipal and state government, because we want to explore why it is that things that exist the way they exist, why they do. And so how the best way to understand that is to first do a thorough assessment of it. And so I think that some of the folks on the panel here will show you how that has been approached. We've started to do this type of exploration, and so we want to continue pushing the envelope on that. And we must not be afraid of this type of introspective examination. I think it's key to the successful achievement of education, the transformation of education in our state and across the nation. We must be unashamed and unafraid to address corruption, parental neglect, racism, sexism, or other impediments to student success. There's nothing that we should allow to impede us from succeeding in an educational environment. We have to be willing to challenge ourselves and challenge the environment that we're in to think broader and to work to achieve those things in that way. It is important to bear in mind that workers' rights and fair employment demands, professional requirements and licensure, all these different types of things for unions and other educational entities regarding the important role of education, that we consider all those things. However, we must keep it key, the main thing, which is the empowerment of urban communities and students in education. So we have to make sure that we empower all of those entities to address these issues thoroughly and completely. So with that said, let me begin to introduce this panel, and then we can begin to explore these issues in a greater way. To my right here is Councilman Ras Baraka, who is obviously a councilman of South Ward in Newark, a recent councilman. We're glad that he's able to join us, but he's also principal of Central High School, and a longtime activist in the community, right? He's been doing things to address issues concerning all the violence that's been going on in the community. So, you know, we're glad that we have someone here that's willing to address those issues, particularly the violence in the inner city that impedes education, that impedes students' interest in education because they're worried about getting to school. Next to him is none other than Mayor Wayne Smith from the Township of Irvington. He's also the president of the Newark Urban Mayors Association. New Jersey Urban Mayors Association. And so he's been involved in a lot of things across the state to bring about transformation in urban municipalities and to bring the issues of urban municipalities to the forefront of not only the things going on in their area, but to the state as a whole. And I think that organization has been a key in galvanizing the interest of the community, in galvanizing all the things that need to happen. Next to him, we have Michael Daniels, who's an educator, a former principal here in Newark, and also an administrator. And we're glad that even though he's retired, he's willing to come and still be a key part in the transformation of education here in the state of New Jersey. So we have all these different folks that are here in working in this capacity to bring about change. Lauren Wells is next to him. Dr. Lauren Wells, she's a PhD from UCLA and a master's in Columbia. She's the director of the broader, bolder approach to education in Newark. And so we're excited to have her here involved and participating. And last but not least, we have Keith Benson, who's here from E3, and he is an activist within the city of Camden. And he's up here all the way from Camden coming to support the issues about transformation in the state of New Jersey. So this is our panel. This event is brought to us by a collaboration of folks. It's the Africana Institute We Care Partners, the Urban Issues Institute, the Alliance for Free Choice, WISM, NJ Bick, the NAAC New Jersey, the Newark branch of the Newark unit of the NAACP has been a key sponsor and advocate in helping to make things happen, so we're glad to have them involved. And so many other organizations and individuals that have been key in not only this particular event, but into the change and transformation of education in the state of New Jersey. One person I know that has been doing this for many years is Dean White, who just walked in the back. We want to give her a wave. Dean White, she's, as I said before, the Dean of Faculty here at the college, and she's been long-term committed to change. She's been here for over 40 years, so that shows her strong commitment to education and to Essex County College. The thousands of students who've gone through here because of all the things that have been needed, and she's been willing to help to make that happen, so we're glad to have her on board. But right now, I want to open it up for initial comments from our panel. We're going to give you 3 to 5 minutes, and then we're going to move into questions. So if you would like to start, Councilman Baraka, then we'll start with you.
I'm doing something about sitting right here.
Yes, indeed. You're in the hot seat.
First, I mean, this is a much needed and timely kind of discussion that needs to happen all over the city right now, considering what's going on here in New Jersey in particular and around the nation in general. First, I mean, just a challenge for us. We named at least about 7 organizations that were a part of organizing this thing. I'm sure each one of these organizations know 20 people. That would mean that we would have at least 140 people in this auditorium and not 20. So we have to become more committed into putting out the things that we need to be addressed, because we are the #1 critics of the people that are engaged in this process daily. Then we need to make sure that we bring these people out to hear what it is that we believe, what we think, to push this issue of education on the forefront of people's minds and on their agenda. That's #1. When we talk about education reform, we're only talking about black people and brown people. So why are we saying education reform? We should just say black people and brown people, or Latinos and African Americans, because the American school system is in shambles. First of all, it is internationally, when you compare it to other nations of comparable or least comparable economic status, America is doing poorly, even the most so-called advanced in the suburban cities. But when we talk about education reform, we're talking about us. We're talking about charter schools, we're talking about us. We talk about all these things. We're basically talking about our children in these urban communities with these huge budgets that other people have their eyes on, and that needs to be put in the mix of the discussion. That does not say that we don't need any serious reform where we are, but we do, because we do. And being in education, I know we need reform, and there's a lot of people in our way from stopping us from getting the kind of things we need. I think basically most people know what we need. Most parents, most teachers, most folks, they know exactly what needs to happen. The problem is that there are a lot of people who get paid a lot of money to make sure that they never implement what needs to happen, or they have people are after these kinds of money. I think we need to go back to what Ed2Forum was talking about a long time ago, community control of the schools. Does that mean a charter school? I think people who want to make money have turned it into that. But I think finally and ultimately it means that the people in these communities need to control these schools. It's like an argument. When I went to college, they used to tell me, I used to go to these meetings and they used to say, we need black schools, we need black schools. And I would say, well, I always went to black schools. Like every school I went to was a black school. I don't understand what you mean by that, because I live in Newark. Every school I went to was I had black principals. I didn't have any white principals. I had black people that was principals and some black teachers, and schools are called Harriet Tubman and George Washington Carver and all these other things. I mean, it's about Negroes who have taken power and refused to still give power to working people in these communities. And ultimately, working people in these neighborhoods know what their children need, they know what they want, and we have to be about trying to remove the impediments in their way so they can begin to actually do the things for these children. And then we compare our children with other people's children who have considerable amount of resources. Like the big complaint is that we spend too much money. When other people's communities spend money as well, they're just not spending public money because they got their own money. So the kind of resources that they need, they can spend on their own after school programs, tutorials, all these things that people spend out of their pockets to pay for. If your kid doesn't know how to do math, you go and hire a tutor. And you pay for these things after school, and you do all these things that, because you live in a community that gives you power and access, you're able to take care of your children as a whole. But our children are supposed to be taken care of by this institution, and the institution is this educational facility, but not the community, because the community is not empowered. Hopefully, and I don't want to take all day, that we have a deep discussion about how we can get the community empowered and be in control of their own children's lives, and make policy around how their kids should be educated, who should be standing in front of them, and what the curriculum should look like. I mean, segregation still exists in America. I mean, we probably in the fourth most segregated state in the country. I mean, the Newark public schools are segregated. The state of New Jersey public schools are segregated. They're segregated by nationality and by resources.
And I'm going to have to cut you there.
Go ahead.
All right. All right. Mayor Smith, thank you.
Just want to share some quick observations and some thoughts on, or make you think about some of the things that impact educational reform. So as a mayor, I'm going to try to share some of that perspective. One is governance. It's a big question on educational reform and who governs it. So let's look at the local level. In New Jersey in particular, there are probably two forms. There's an appointed school board. Generally, that school board is appointed by the mayor if you live in that process, so you can affect the governance if you can affect who's mayor. The other format in New Jersey is an elected school board, where school board candidates run for office, like Councilman Baraka and Mayor Smith. They run just like we. The only thing, they don't get paid. So a lot of times people think the school board members are serving, but they serve as committed volunteers. I guess the second level, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think educational reform, as Councilman Baraka has tried to raise the issue about even the number of people. I'm going to hope that we have the quality of people here that will then engage the community as we move this discussion forward. We need to really have a grassroots movement around education, like Councilman Baraka has led around violence, and really centered around some of our neighborhood schools, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road. So, and I'm sure he'll tell you, and other educators who've been in the business for a long time, there's just not enough participation even at the local school level in our local PTAs. All data shows that where parents are significantly engaged, or a community is significantly engaged, then schools perform better. Now, on the state level, we have a real struggle. Now, there is a third ambiguous governance form, and those are the ones who are governed, like here in Newark, where you have state takeover. And right now, Newarkers are faced with who's going to rule, who's going to govern, is it legal? And those are questions that Mayor Smith won't get into, because that's the question that will be settled by Newarkers. But those are issues that you need to be effectively engaged in. And then who funds that governance, whether it's the president of Facebook or some other format where you get your money from. Some people think whoever, pays the fiddler plays the tune, you play that tune. So those are issues as a community we'll have to deal with. And then, of course, your assembly people are going to vote on educational budgets. Communities need to make sure they know where their assembly person and state senator sit on educational issues and all these things around educational reform. On the federal level, there's a whole nother, I think President Obama, I was just on Channel 9 where he pitched an idea, and there was a debate around, and I participated in the debate, where he wants to extend the school day, thinking that if you had more time in the classroom, and I happen to believe that there's some validity to that argument, that that could have some impact on educational outcomes in our neighborhoods. And so the issue I said, even to the president, was, if you fund it, as there's more time, that means there's more money, then that might be one viable option for some of our schools. Take the broader sense. Here's some of the broader discussion that people should be aware of. The U.S. Conference of Mayors actually had been pushing for this thing called, I'm not a proponent of it per se, they've been pushing for mayoral control of schools around the country. So the community should be aware of that national debate. There's a guy out of California named Eli Broad who runs the Broad Foundation. And he has a whole bunch of money behind the idea of letting mayors control. And so in New York City, that happened. In Philadelphia, that happened. Looks like there's some kind of model in Newark that about to try to let that happen. So if the community likes that model, and you think that's fine. But if you don't like that model, then you obviously need to be raising your voice and getting in the policy discussion about those issues. Now, my orientation says I'm a product of the Newark Public Schools. So I think public schools can work. And I hear Councilman Baraka saying he's a product of the Newark Public Schools. So there's some degree of educational success for some students. I think is how do we get to where we maximize that? So that's not the exception. That's the standard for every kid that comes out of the Newark Public Schools or any urban public school district in the state. Now, there are other institutions in our community that educate kids, and we need to look at them because even some of those are fragile and weak. In our neighborhoods, the parochial schools, because people look at those perceptually as a better model for kids. And I will tell you that I know in this city, in my city, some of them are struggling significantly to educate kids. And people think there may be some people view that with better disciplinary environments and so forth. Or you want to send your children for religious education or a certain orientation, then that may work for you. But I've seen examples where they don't have the same resources. The curriculum is not as good. And I've seen kids who transferred from Catholic schools had to catch up in public schools in our neighborhood. So if you're looking even at that model, in the 60s, there was, to get your own schools so that you create the cultural environment or the religious environment. The Nation of Islam developed the Clara Muhammad schools, was called the University of Islam. When I grew up, some of those models work, and as a community, we need to be looking at those things. Now, on the question of charter schools, is the charter school...
Let me cut you there, and we'll come back to the charter school point in a minute. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Michael Daniels, and I'm very proud to say 3 months ago I retired after 41 years in Newark Public Schools. I'm not going to be very long. I'll answer the questions. I didn't have any speech prepared. But I joined a group that I think is overlooked, and we need to start looking at it. And that group is volunteers, retirees, mentors, etc. And that's the group I've joined. Just because I'm retired doesn't mean I can't be involved in young people's lives, since I have for 41 years, all right? And I think we need to really go after those people, my colleagues, I'll call them. They're out there, and they're available and have skills and expertise that we need to utilize, all right? Reform, we need reform, and there's nothing wrong with reform, but I think we also have some things in place already, and I think we're not utilizing them, all right? I'm not totally against reform, but I just think there are things in place in Newark Public Schools that we're not utilizing. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, or everybody wants to change things. It's not necessary sometimes to change everything, okay? Especially just because we're not successful at all the time, it doesn't mean that we, got to change it. There are things in place, and we've been working on things for many, many years, and I think we should call people accountable for those things, all right? I can't stop without saying, of course, the parents are really the key to helping out this education. We can't do anything in the schools without the parents, and I think we need to go after those parents and get those parents involved. And here again, I think the volunteers and mentors can do that, or can help do that, okay? And lastly, I think the teachers, of course, need all the assistance they can get. We talk about the teachers being qualified and certified and getting more education and taking tests and all that kind of good stuff. But the teachers need assistance in those classrooms. And they're on the front line, and they need help, okay? And I think that's what we need to be about, getting those parents out to help those teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Is it on? Good evening. I didn't come with talking points prepared either, but I've been listening, and so I do have a few things that I want to comment on. And a lot of it has to do with part of the climate that we're in. There's a lot of urgency all of the sudden around educating our kids. And, you know, my position is that it's always been an urgent thing for Black people in particular and Black and brown people as this society has gotten increasingly browner. And so that sense of urgency that suddenly appears makes me ask a lot of questions about incentives, et cetera, et cetera. Even in the conversation today, there's this mythical time when public education was good. And I wonder when that time was, because when people point back 50 years ago, 70, 80, 90% of the people in this room could not go to public schools. So I really question the notion of a time when public education was good. I think we need to reframe that time and maybe think about a time when it might have been getting better, particularly for us, which would have been during the 70s and the 80s when there were some intentional policies being put in place in order to make sure that our kids began to have access to the resources that we need to educate our children. And I think that when we have this conversation that goes back to the 1950s, 1940s about public education being this wonderful, great opportunity that people had, we're really, really missing a whole point in history, which was when we could not go to quality public schools and we fought to get into them. So I would really like to reframe that conversation. I think we need to be talking about what needs to be reformed. I don't hear anybody talking about education in this conversation about reform. I hear things that have to do with reorganizing systems, but we're not at all talking about what actually should be happening in schools or how schools should be organized or what you do with extended day. I mean, more time in a day, unless it's fundamentally changed and the nature of education is changed and the ways in which teachers engage and interact with students and schools engage and interact with parents fundamentally changes, then qualitatively nothing has changed. And so I think that those are very important points that we need to insert into this conversation. It's great to say we're going to give you an extra 2 hours in school, but unless, like it was said by the gentleman on my left, we begin to think about how teachers work with students. Are you working from a culturally relevant position that brings in content, project-based learning, things that actually engage and inspire our kids and get them involved in classrooms, then I don't think we've fundamentally done anything different than we've been doing for the last 50 or 40 years, which is moving around bodies. And so I think we need to get past the point of moving around bodies to actually educating minds and hearts.
And I would like for you, as well as Mr. Benson, to take at least 1 minute to say what your organizations are about.
So I actually work for NYU, New York University, and I'm the director of a project called the Broader, Bolder Approach to Education, and I work with Mr. Baraka and 6 other principals in Newark in the Central Ward, and our work is fundamentally focused in 4 areas as a strategy to change both the quality and nature of schooling, but also the positionality of schools and communities. And so we are obviously working on education reforms, and I don't mean that in the most simplistic way where, you know, very often people talk about reading and writing. We're talking about building high quality, excellent schools where students have the opportunity to take all kinds of classes, whether they be AP classes, classes that study philosophy, languages, sciences that really prepare them for medical careers or careers that traditionally you might not be prepared for. In some of the schools here, we're working in community engagement. We've got parents engaged in the process with us. We've got the PTA presidents working in different ways. And there's a lot of work that we need to do in that area. But our intention is to really build a strong parent and community base around these schools so that as this becomes deeper, parents own it, community members own it. You know, I always say at the end of the day, the money goes away. And when the money goes away, if there's not a powerful base of people in a place, then it hasn't been changed. And so we want that powerful base of people to be here to continue to own the work. Social services, making sure that families, kids have access to what they need, that they have support getting to the things that they need, and that there's somebody who can walk folks through processes that are often antagonistic and negative for them in a way that's going to end up being productive and useful. And then the last part is economic development, which in terms of education, excuse me, I haven't coughed all day, but I'm sitting here coughing. We need internships and curriculum that are really preparing kids for high-level careers and jobs. You know, fundamentally, Du Bois' critique of the talented 10th, which he did critique, was that they left and they never came back. And so he even brought in his thinking to say that, you know what, we need to be educating every 1,000th of folks to go out and to get their education and then come back into the community and to transform it. And that is fundamentally what, from my perspective, the work that we're doing is all about.
Okay, thank you. Next, Mr. Benson.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out. Your presence does make a difference, and I especially like to thank the young people I see in the back, because you were going to be charged with correcting a lot of the ills of society. I'm glad to see you here, and thank you so much. My name is Keith Benson. I'm with E3, and E3 is an education organization which simply says whatever works. We support whatever works. If a public school works, we support it. If a private school works, we support it. If a Catholic school works, support it. If a home school works, whatever works for a child. Basically, I just want to ask the audience a real quick question, and I'll be done. What does Mayor Red of Camden, Mayor Booker of Newark, and Barack Obama have in common? I don't want to hold you long, so I'm going to answer it real quick. They all had the benefit of school choice. And if you look around at the top earners and the top producers and the top people in our community, they had the benefit of choice. Slavery was a sin that was as scarlet, but yet it was controversial because there was people's money involved. Freedom is choice. I don't see how there's a controversy whether we have school choice. School choice simply means whatever works. I won the gold medal, which is the highest medal that NACP state gives out for the work with children. I work with youth all the time. I'm in the hood, picking up the broken pieces of inadequate education. Some of these kids will work well in certain settings, others will work well in other settings. We need to get serious about the genocide that's going on in our community and start employing whatever works. If it works, support it. If it doesn't work, shut it down.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that's your opening statements for everyone. What we want to do now is I just want to say a couple things. I see a few people in the audience. I'd like to thank John Smith for joining us, Jeff Sindler, Herb Glenn, who's helping to coordinate this whole event here. And then we have Amelia and Amina Baraka. There are statues in the Newark community who've been here bringing about change and transformation, not only in Newark, but across the nation. Jeremiah Grace has been working real hard on education reform. Michael James, and he's also doing work with the Abbott Leadership Institute. And anybody else who I missed your name, a lot of folks have been working, both from Street Warriors here. A lot of folks have been here working, doing a lot of things to bring about change in the community. And so we want to be conscious of not only that they're here, but that there's a lot of folks out there doing things, having different ideas about change. And I think one of the comments that Dr. Wells mentioned that's important is that we have to be specific about the idea of what change is about. What is it that we're reforming, and how is it that we're reforming it? And we have to probe that question deeply so that we're not just scratching the surface on these issues. Now, that we've begun and we've opened this up, we had the first forum was on May the 20th of 2010, and there was a list of questions that the audience put together, and to show the continuity in this discussion that we're having, this ongoing dialogue, but also hopefully to bring about a movement about change and implementing things from all these different perspectives, we actually are bringing these questions back to you today. And so the first one that I want to to bring to the table, and Councilman Baraka touched upon this, and I want to see how the panels, how they respond to this. And the question was, why is race still disempowering our community? How is it that race is still an influential piece here, and what is it that we have to do to transform the impact that race has on our community? You have about, let's say, a minute or so, 2 minutes, a minute or two to respond to each question. Each panelist, please. As a matter of fact, we're starting down here. We'll start with, on the other end and work our way back. Mr. Benson.
Could you repeat the question again, please? Could you repeat the question again?
Yes, the question is, why is race still disempowering our communities? What is the impact of race and racism in the school system today?
I think brief as possible. In 1865, we won physical freedom from slavery. In 1965, we won legal freedom from unjust laws. America was built on the exploitation of brown people. And it didn't just stop because we had a 1965 Voting Rights Act. So race is going to be an issue until we can educate our people out of it, and quite frankly, educate other people out of it. So race is still an issue because we, as a community, are not educated. And we are not educated because of racism. So it's a circle that has, a cycle that has to be broken by visionary people.
Okay. Dr. Wells.
Well, race is still an issue because it has never been addressed. I don't have we've done all kinds of things. Like I said earlier, we move bodies, but we have never, ever fundamentally dealt with the ideologies on how this society is organized. And white supremacy is a fundamental organizing principle of the society that we live in. And so until that piece of culture, ideology, pathology even, is fundamentally addressed and the problems are switched from being directed at us to being interrogated in the opposite direction, we will continue to have these conversations and questions about race. We've entered this space in time where we're colorblind, right? Which is a fundamentally preposterous notion, because I look at you and I see what color you are. And in seeing that color and then being socialized into the world that we live in, I could, if I didn't have the intent to deal with my mind, ascribe all kinds of stereotypes, judgments, preconceptions of who and what you are simply by virtue of the way that you look. And we are fundamentally not teaching as a society our children to confront stereotypes, to confront images, to confront the notion of superiority and supremacy. And, I just think that that's what it is. It's there. It's in the water.
And I just want to preface one thing. As you respond to the questions, let's think about solution-oriented, right? Not only to further articulate the problem, but what are the solutions to address the very point that you raised, right? How do we transform that?
I mean, we're in the classroom. Do you want to go ahead, Matt?
No, go
we can do the work in the classroom, right? We can bring in white teachers who do anti-racist work, and we can educate kids to understand that we are all equal, we are all the same, we are all biologically capable of accomplishing the same things, and we can do the same things in our communities to counter the notion that we are not smart, we are not worthy, we have no value, et cetera, et cetera. But at that level, that's not going to change anything. The problem that we have is a systemic ideology that organizes everything that happens in our world. And so unless it is addressed at that level, then we're going to continue to be here 100 years from now asking the same questions about what is wrong with those people and what is not wrong with these people. Right. And it's not here. It is fundamentally the way in which our society is organized. And I think our challenge is that we have to touch as many of our children in ways that allow them to understand that that is how society is organized, and that they are absolutely entitled to doing more than the society provides them with, and to empower them to do that, and to empower them to know that the responsibility is that you have to pass that on.
Okay, thank you. Now, as we move on down the panel, I'm gonna tweak the question, because I want you all to think about the very things that she mentioned, but also, you know, she said that it's a systemic problem. So, you know, think about, as you're talking about this point about racism, how do you actually how are you going to address this systemic problem? How are we going to transform that systemic foundation, looking at education, if white supremacy is fundamental? How are we going to transform it? Is there a way to end that? No, I'll leave it there.
You would have to say that before me.
Yes.
No, I agree with Mr. Benson. I think it's an education type of thing. We have got to educate the community on everything, not just education and schooling and what the kids need to be doing. I think we need to educate the community. And that goes for as far as their legal rights are concerned, as far as the school system is concerned. There are things that, you know, the public and the community do not know. And we need to help them find out what those things are and educate them, you know, in any way we can. And it's I call it a caring type of thing. If everybody cared and took on a family or a person or a kid or something like that, we would help the situation out.
Yeah, my observations about why race is still disempowering it's really not, I think it's more of a cultural and a sense of who we are as people. Most of the change that I've seen in society occurred when people began to challenge the perceptions of the outside world and how we felt about ourselves. So whether it was we're an African people and began to hold some self-worth about who we are, and begin to look at what culturally impacts us and how we feel about ourselves. That affects the way a kid learns. So as a community, I think we've had a major step back of how we deal with ourselves. And when I talk about a grassroots movement around education, it's really in the vein that Brother Mitchell was saying. We have to do a whole lot of work on a whole lot of fronts to make our kids feel better about themselves that impacts their educational outcomes. And, you know, there's certainly been models in our history, whether it was Amiri's work in Newark and in the neighborhoods where they were educating people on the street, whether it was the Nation of Islam's work about lifting people's self-pride in the neighborhoods, which made people want to seek educational outcomes and do the work and create their own schools. That's a question of who we are, what we believe in, what we find culturally relevant. And that some of the solutions are we have to engage ourselves in a way like we used to. We have to challenge even our own places of worship, whether if it's a church or a masjid, or you have no religious point of view at all, just basically in our neighborhoods about who we are, our history, our culture, what's relevant for us to be a success. All that stems into the growth of our neighborhoods, how they're kept, what kind of economic growth, how we support each other. All those things are going to impact the educational outcome of kids. And unless we do that in kind of a mission-driven way, where we've had an impact on society in the past, we won't have the significant kinds of things we want to see happen for our children.
Well, I want to first agree with the things that Dr. Wells was what she said to me in terms of how to deal with it. What I was trying to say is implicit in the problem is always the solution. And we always say don't talk about the problem, talk about the problem, but the problem in the problem is the solution. So if you're talking about white supremacy, then you're saying what the solution is, the destruction of white supremacy. When you're talking about how systems are organized to keep people oppressed, then you have to talk about rearranging that system or people's relationship to power. Because that's really what we, in essence, are talking about, people's relationship to power, which is what I tried to state in the beginning, that we have to begin to give people power at the most immediate level, which is the community level, to have real control and say-so over what's happening in their own children's lives, not corporations, not smart individuals from these places, not big-time companies and universities, but people. Like, they know how to fix their own lives. We've been trying to fix our own lives since we got here. You know, it's just people have been in our way for a long time, and some of the people look like us. We just have to be careful that in the most desperate time, because we're in a desperate time, you know, in Germany right before, you know, Hitler taught people to be nuts. You know, things got really, really desperate, and what he said to people almost seemed plausible. You know, the people who were desperate in desperate situations, he began to talk nationalist talk. He began to say, because even the people who are our enemies now run around quoting all of these revolutionary people. They start saying things, and it sounds like they agree with you, and really they don't. They only mean educate their friends and not you. I mean, you start. What they're really saying is that they want to create a tiered system, a caste system, where there are people who have these certain choices, and most people who don't have these choices will always be in a situation that they're in. And we have to be careful that we don't agree with these people, that we listen to what they're saying carefully and understand that that's not what we want, that we want democracy. And the problem with our community is that we don't have democracy, and that we've been struggling and fighting for more democracy in the school. You know, and some of us sometimes take it, you know, we become ultra or we become liberal with that, but we need democracy, and that means that the people need to decide what happens in their own lives, what kind of education their kids are going to get, who stands before their children, what the curriculum looks like, what it should sound like, what it should be, and who should shape it. All of that is important, and I think that the people in these neighborhoods are wise enough to do that themselves. And they don't need people, you know, flying in here telling them how to govern their own lives, when I think that they already know. And if we give them the credit and the power to do that, then I think that they will do that. Slavery was legal, and people fought to get out of slavery. You know, they fought to remove themselves from slavery. Nobody said one day that slavery is over. People fought against slavery, and it crumbled because of the weight that was put on it. It couldn't exist anymore with the level of resistance that was happening in this country through slave revolts, rebellions, abolitionists, poets, all kind of people began to talk slavery out of existence. And so it disappeared, you know, at least in that form. And then we have to begin to struggle against it in the form that it shows up again, because your enemy just didn't disappear. You know, he's going to find more ways to oppress you and hold you down. And I think right now, education is a way that is being done. And the people, it's like a mystery. How come these kids aren't learning? It's ridiculous, because you know there are white schools that are not successful. Do you know this? That there are some white schools that are where people are not learning. Like, we won't discuss that. Like, you talk about race, I mean, that's the most blatant thing to me. When they talk about Abbott, you think they're talking about all Negroes. There are some white districts that are Abbott districts. Like, there are some white kids that are not learning in their high schools, but we're not having a meeting about them. You know, we're having a meeting about us. And we should be having a meeting about us, because it is us. But what I'm saying is that the world is, that picture, like the welfare queen picture was a black mother who refused to go to work. Like, the failed school is Negro kids who, you know, are gangbangers, and their mothers crackheads, and they won't get involved in education, and they need $100 million from some rich dude to give us some money and some smart people to come and teach us how to, like, raise our families properly and value education and get into schools and do what's proper, which is ridiculous to me. Because I see mothers every day breaking their neck trying to do what they need to do. The problem is the system that we are in, the education system now in Newark public schools, is flawed, is wrought with white supremacy, silly bureaucrats, individuals who are down there who's designed to destroy anything that you come up with that's innovative and creative, a bunch of people that are pencil pushers who work for they're state operatives, and their job is to push whatever the state tells them to push, despite the fact that it kills their own children. They're going to do it anyway. You trying to come up with a curriculum called social justice, they'll tell you that you can't use the word white supremacy. This is ridiculous. These are Negroes that are doing this. These are not white people that are doing this. Negroes who are in charge of our children's lives who are doing this. And guess what? We in charge of it. There's no white person in charge of it. But what black school? We need a black school. Yo, kid, go to Malcolm X Shabazz, for God's sakes. What black school? What more of a black school you need? The name of your school is Malcolm X Shabazz. Your principal is black. Every vice principal in there is black. I mean, the whole doggone school is 90% black. Black teachers, black students. I mean, it's black, it's so midnight black in here. The mayor is black. I mean, it's right up the street from Irvin Turner Boulevard and Muhammad Ali Avenue. It's ridiculous. I mean, we got to talk about how we move to this point and that there are people in charge who are preventing us from having control of our own lives. And these people are state operatives who are in charge of our lives. And until we get rid of these opportunists, we're always going to be having this discussion.
Okay. Now I think that's... See, and that pushes us in the direction of the next question, and in terms of probing this some more, because one of the things in this discussion is that there's something called the Amistad legislation that's supposed to be addressing that very point. Now, the next question I have is, how come, or first of all, can the Amistad legislation, or the bill, the effort to bring that, can that help in the area that you're suggesting, and if it can, why hasn't it to this date?
I think it can, but you asking people who don't know African-American history to teach African-American history. I mean, we won't, I mean, that's just, okay, you make a law, you got to teach people African-American history, but they went through the same school system that the people you think need African-American history, they went through. And nobody taught them, so how they going to teach these kids? Not only that, the publishing companies and the book companies, they control the books, they control the assessment, they control the professional development, and all of this stuff. And none of that is in it. And then they'll tell you that the stuff is so implicit in the curriculum, it's so implicit that you can't see it. So, and they say it's to your face. Oh, it's embedded. The African-American history is embedded in the work. It's so embedded in the work, it's not visible. That's how embedded it is. So we're talking about it. They just don't want you to say it because language is powerful. So if I say white supremacy, it makes people think certain things as opposed to saying hegemony or something cute, or academic. It's nice to say that, or racism, or sexism, or that creates some kind of emotional kind of, disease that people don't want to, And you ask people to do this, and we don't have the power or the instruments to make that happen. And that's something that we need to be talking about. How do we seize that power? How do we create those instruments to begin to make the Amistad law into reality?
Anybody else want to address that?
I just want to ask the audience, how many people know what the Amistad legislation is? Clearly not everybody in the room. Right. So the issue is, if you have a tool, and I think a few people said there.
Can you come up to the mic?
I think our Brother Mitchell said that there are tools that already exist that we're not even deploying as a community. And so if you don't even know what the Amistad legislation requires, a whole lot of people in these urban cities around this country fought and died for African American history, Latino studies, all of that to be taught in these schools. So they just re-engaged that through some state legislation. And actually, it's supposed to be for all schools, not just for urban schools. It's for Short Hills and Milburn and all those other places to know about our history and traditions and culture, and maybe that's a chip in what the racist issues that we're dealing with as a society. So that's a tool, and if we don't know how to engage it and challenge it from a perspective that people are not doing it, then that's a problem for us as a community.
Anybody else?
I think that if we just taught history and taught it factually and accurately, and people taught from a place of building understanding in all children about how this society and the world has evolved over time, that we would not need legislation in order to make the distribution of our history and our culture and our knowledge relevant in our schools and our classrooms. And so I think that, the question of why is tied into the whole conversation that we've been having, but I think that it just speaks to the larger way in which school is organized. And I think that part of what we're missing in this conversation is there's a real difference between schooling and education, right? And so when you talk about putting something like the Amistad legislation into effect into a school, you could put it into a school and it could become part of somebody's day, and it could not fundamentally change anything. But if it's actually being used for educative purposes, that's really tied into larger conversations about how you teach and what you teach and why you teach it, and it has a fundamental purpose other than just being a policy that's put into paper, mandated, and then people are forced to comply with it, and it may or may not be utilized in a way that makes anybody feel like it's relevant, right? It could just be a class. And, I don't know what the value of having our history taught as just a class does to fundamentally disrupting anything in schools or in our communities.
Right. Okay, can you guys, if you have cell phones, okay, please turn them off. We're going to, we're getting ready to open up for questions, but as we have the questions, I need you to write down your questions so that we can continue the continuity of what's going on here. So there's some paper, if you have paper, or if someone brings something, we can have it. But give us just a couple seconds for that, and then we're going to open up to the audience. But if you write your questions down and then we collect it, what we can do is in the next session, we're going to continue to build on this and build this momentum around the set of questions that you have for our panelists. One more question before we open up to the audience. And I think that, that these are some important things that we're talking about. And I want to narrow down the point about the systemic inequality. One of the questions raised from last time, and I think some of you have tried to tackle this, but maybe I want to push the envelope a little. It says, how do we address the systemic inequality of education for African American men in urban and suburban schools? Specifically, there's a lot of programs, a lot of funding out there in the state of New Jersey now, and the federal government that's coming for both for primary and secondary schools, but also even for colleges, right? ECC had won a grant for some of the things, and there's a lot of monies out there to address issues concerning addressing men, young African American men and Latino men in these urban environments. How do we use not just the funding, but is there a systemic way we can address the problems that we're seeing with relation to them? And how do we take some of the things you've already said and implement it and address it specifically to that targeted population? Well, anybody want to? Sure.
Well, one thing I try to teach the young brothers I work with, and I've been working with them successfully for over 15 years, I teach them that life is purpose. And I tell all of them, over 18, if you're a young man, you're over 18, you have an obligation, especially if you believe in the word, if you're Islamic or if you're a Christian, and you believe that multiply, be fruitful, and subdue the land, which is the first command that God gave. In order to subdue the land, you have to be a member of an organization. So it's just my opinion. I'm not trying to judge anybody, but I think it's imperative, and I think there's no excuse for an African-American man, knowing the state of our urban areas, knowing the state of our community, not to be a member of some organization. If you don't like any organization you're in, start your own. But power, and the power to subdue the land, is given through organizations, not through individuals. If Donald Trump didn't have his buildings, he was just a rich guy, he would almost be irrelevant. What makes Donald Trump powerful is all the organizations that he has. So I always implore young people, and especially those of us who feel as though we have made it, it's almost inexcusable that any of us would not be a part of an organization and out here working, at least a few times a week, tithing your time to do something about the perilous situation that we find in our community. So organizing yourself is the number one thing if you really want to get something done, if you're serious.
Okay.
I agree. Organizations, we always think about the organizations that have been organized or planned or designed for certain groups or certain clubs or things like that in the school or in the community, but certainly organizations like band or drill teams or whatever the case may be. There are organizations like band that young people relate to and grow up with and be very proud of. They're very proud of the chorus. They may be a member of the chorus. They're very proud of that. So I agree. Every young person needs to be involved in some organization and that belonging. Gangs do it, and they're successful. So we have got to do the same thing with our organizations.
And the adults too.
And the adults too.
The first, to me, I mean, okay, a couple of things. The first, to me, the first organization is the family. That's the smallest unit of society is your family. So when we're talking about men, we should also be talking about women because men and women are part of the unit of the family. And when we organize ourselves around specific things, that's not abnormal. That's something that we need to be doing. But most of those things should be about improving our families, like, and improving our lives here. And whatever exists to do that, then I would say that needs to happen. And whatever we're doing in these schools, we just need to be involved. But I want to say a point too that like, the utopian world that we want doesn't exist, right? We said that and we understand that, but we don't really understand that. Like James Baldwin said, as long as you think you're white, I'm gonna be forced to think I'm black, right? So that world doesn't exist. We want everything to be whatever, but because it's not like that, we have to exert ourselves. We have to exert that, which is the reason why people fought for Africana studies, African American studies, because it was gone and it was left out, and it's being taught by people in an institution, in a system that is designed to erase it. That's why it's important that we exert it, that we push it forward as much as we can. The same with black boys who are in these communities dying in these streets. And now the rising statistic is African American Latino women who are going to jail, who are now doing the things that these boys are taking on, the roles that these men have once taken on. They're taking on these roles too. So the discussion about these boys have been absent women. And so I'm on the flip side. Like in the school, we have a bunch of programs for boys. Like we have the programs for guys. It's the programs for women that are missing. Like we have very little programs for women, sisterhood programs about hygiene, about parenthood, about empowerment. Those programs are gone. I mean, or are not there. And I think that ultimately, if we develop those programs, that by itself also has an effect on the development of men. I believe that it has a real and physical and emotional effect on the development of young men in these communities. I just believe that.
I think that at an institutional level, we need to start to really examine discipline practices and discipline policies, and when they start to impact our boys and how they begin to show signs that black boys and Latino boys are encountering different kinds of consequences for similar actions that happen in school that point them in certain trajectories. We need to look at very intensely how our boys are ending up disproportionately in special education. And we need to hold people accountable for addressing those issues. And we need to provide the kind of supports that Mr. Baraka talked about and were also talked about in terms of mentoring. And I think that we fundamentally have to work with the people that work with our kids, whether they be in schools or social service organizations, and do the work that is going to make them deal with our boys in ways that are helpful and that promote their well-being and that do not criminalize them for behaviors. Just an example, my sister taught on 128th Street and 2nd Avenue for a while. And this was a second grade boy. Had a sister, mom had been taken out of the home, social worker had come and got them, and she came to school to get this boy. He's 7 years old. He is not happy to see the social worker. Right? She is not his friend. Like, that is a rational response. You came, you took my mother away, now you want to come and you want to take me away, and you think that I should be happy to see you?
Right.
They put this 7-year-old boy in handcuffs and escorted him out of the school. Right, so there's a problem with the way in which people understand the way that our children react to things. And so I think that until we begin to address that, we're going to continue to see the same kinds of things happening that are happening now.
I think that there's a recent, on WBI, there was a whole thing recently talking about unconscious bias. And whether it's unconscious or conscious, the whole point was that there's these folks have bias and that they do things that negatively impact folks in the community, and that it creates this differentiation between how African American or Latino young boys and Europeans are treated, and that those punishments are meted out. And so one of the things that they talked about is that until we begin to look at this unconscious bias, it's almost like looking at colonialism, the impact of racism and imperialism, that all these different things have impacted people in ways that both Europeans and Africans and other folks, everybody is doing the same type of thing that has a negative impact on folks. And so until we begin to unravel that, that we are going to continue to perpetuate things that negatively impact us. And so we have to see our own ways that are negative in terms of that, and that's going to undo some of the systemic nature of the bias that they're talking about.
I just wanted to make a point. You know, the state cited Newark Public Schools for the disproportionate amount of African American males that were, and this goes to what Dr. Wells was talking about, disproportionate African American males that they have subjected to special needs programs, right? So we have now I'm going to show you how this series of things works. So you have a huge number of African American guys, young men that are in special needs programs. There's also a problem because the teachers in those special needs programs don't have the proper certifications that they need to teach them the content once you get to a higher level of education in terms of secondary, middle school, so forth and so on. So a lot of the teachers don't even have the proper certification or the content skill to give them the information. So what's happening now, you have a host of children who have probably been misclassified in the beginning because of their aggressiveness, because of other things that is not understood, who don't have access to the same general education curriculum as most of the kids. Now this is where it gets really tricky, because those kids still have to take the state test, and they have to take the state test, and though they may be exempt from passing the test, their scores are still counted. The state still counts the scores against the public school system, even when they say they know the kid can't pass the test. See, this is how they are designing a situation where we fail on purpose. I mean, this is where racism and all these things plays a part of it. Now, the other flip side of it is that there's a whole host of schools that was talked about earlier, charter schools, parochial schools, all these other schools that talked about that don't have to take special needs kids, right? So they could take a kid, and once they find out their special needs, they could put them out into a regular public school. So you have a host of kids who have never ever gotten a general education curriculum at all, and are still held to the same requirements that every other American child is being held to. And because you don't have the resources, which they refuse to give you, to bring that child up to par, then you're being penalized for it and being put all over America about a failing school system, a failing school, but they won't say that we have a failing system that's created a situation where a whole host of African American men have been put, and Latinos have been put disproportionately in these programs in the 3rd grade. You understand what I'm saying? So this goes on and on and on and on. I mean, it's systemic.
Anybody else? All right, we're going to move to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please, there's a microphone over here. I need you to write your questions up, and then we'll take it right over here at the microphone, please. That way, because it's being recorded, so we want to make sure we get we want to get everybody, you can hear loud and clear. The microphone is right up there, so you can form a line right up there.
Good evening. My name is Geronimo Red. I'm an independent community activist. I'm also a poet and a philosopher. First, let me say to the Barakas, I've always honored you as leaders. I've always looked up to you. I've learned from you, and I wish to continue to do so. I mean, it's an honor for me to be in your presence and also to ask my question. I wrote it. It's kind of lengthy, but that's the way of my essence. So it's written in a philosophical format, so I'll take my time in reading it and present it to you, and this is for the whole panel. In addressing the future of education, do we teach from the standpoint of a 42-book volume encyclopedia called The Black Athena, erasing the white supremacy and replacing it with comedic intellectual supremacy? or do we continue to teach from the 20th century standpoint, as an example, Pan-Africanism or W.E.B. Du Bois's black folks? That's the question mark. White intellectual supremacy versus Kemetic intellectual supremacy. If Kemetic be the origin of man, and that is the truth, and is it truly fair to teach that for all men and have it respected?
You got the question?
Would you like me to repeat it?
The last part.
Repeat.
Repeat the last part. You gotta make it quick. We don't have a lot of time, though.
All right. The last part says, it was two questions in one. It just was lengthy. That's what I said, it was lengthy. For the backdrop, I'll just say it briefly. Is it fair to teach more from a Black Athena standpoint for those that have read that material, or encompassing the Kemetic origins of man versus the white supremacy in which we're complaining about now for our future? That's my question.
Well, I think I'm going to try to deal with that a little bit. I think what Dr. Wells was trying to explain earlier is that if we taught the truth, then we would address some of the things that we're talking about. But I would like to go a little further with it, because that's the point I was trying to make, that because we are oppressed, then we do have to exert ourselves a little more, that it's important for us to establish, we would need a Black Studies organization or group if they taught Black Studies, but they don't. So we need that until they do. You understand what I'm saying? Until it's that way. We can't just say, we're going to teach this, the truth, but they don't teach the truth. They never did. We can't rely on them to do that, you know. As long as women are oppressed, you're going to need women's studies. Like James Baldwin said, as long as you think you're white, I'm going to be forced to think I'm Black. That's what I mean. So you need to be able to exert yourself, or you're going to be absent. So I do think there is some relevance in the idea that we need to teach our history from our perspective, from our point of view, and teach history from what we have, the information that we have gathered, like Black Athena and things like that, that there is a place for that, yes.
Anybody else before we move on? I also wanted to say one thing about the textbooks. You know, there are textbooks available, but they're not used, right? So Malefi Asante helped to write a textbook that incorporates lots of stuff about African history, but it is not used in most of the school districts. So it's about how those books are chosen, who decides what texts are used and are not used, and why. And then, you know, obviously the whole Texas piece on the textbooks, that most of the textbooks that are used are from Texas. And so there's been resistance to the utilization of those textbooks, but they're out there. It's just a matter of whether or not they get to them in the various school districts. Next question. Make sure you keep it short, please. Introduce yourself, say your name, and then go ahead.
All right, first of all, that's not so much of a question as a comment, especially for what you just said. My name is Troy Tompkins. I'm professionally known as Troy CLE. I don't think anybody heard of me possibly, but I wrote this book called The Marvelous World Saga, which is published by Simon & Schuster, and Random House. Was once called The Black Harry Potter. Like, I was everywhere, New York Times, everywhere. Like, it was kind of big. My point is like, just to say what you just said, that there are books out there, I just want to say that I'm someone who is trying to get involved in my community. Mayor Smith of Irvington, in fact, I have a meeting with your superintendent tomorrow about my book, because she sees the educational value of it. But I'm going to just keep this short. You were talking about books that do have value, right? My book is published by Simon & Schuster and Random House, so it gives it a different level of credibility, even though by someone who did publish a book that maybe have a doctorate in something else, right? But Mr. Baraka, you said that there are embedded messages in books. Well, my book, it has 70 literary terms. It's based on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, David Hume, George Berkeley, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and all these different things. And it's created a critical, analytical, and independent thinking curriculum for students, which is being implemented in Brooklyn already, and I'm trying to bring it to New Jersey, where I'm from, and I'm having a good level of success with that. So my point is that people are trying to do things to elevate our children's education.
Thank you.
And senior afterwards, please.
Good evening. My name is Khalid Muhammad, U.S. Army, Iraqi war veteran. Thank you. Earlier, the panel spoke about white supremacy as embedded in systematic control of school systems. And my question is towards Dr. Wells. Do you believe that, first of all, I agree with what you said about the difference in schooling and educating. But I wanted to ask, do you believe that the people that are in power, when the facts contradict their theories of supremacy, do you believe that it's truly not necessary to use legislation in order to tell our portion of the story, which is the truth?
I wasn't suggesting that we shouldn't use legislation. I mean, my whole well-being in this society is fundamentally based on constitutional amendments, judicial decisions, legislation, right? So I believe that for my safety and well-being, that those things are fundamentally essential, because when we begin to take those things away, as we see has happened in the last 20 years, we become poor, we become more subject to all kinds of legal and, interaction with the criminal system, and so those things are essential. My point was that if we did teach history as it was, then those kinds of things wouldn't be necessary, and that I'm not sure that I want an individual who is not capable of handling that kind of material, instilling it in our children. And I think that that's what the fundamental question is how do we actually prepare and train teachers to utilize curriculum? There's all kinds of language, culturally relevant. People bring in Jay-Z and play the radio, right, and say they did something in class. But that's not,
That's true.
that's not using the music for a relevant purpose. And so unless somebody can actually do something with that connects it to children's lived experiences, their realities in their community, their realities in the larger context of the world, I don't know if that doesn't actually reinforce all of the things that currently exist. So that was my point.
Thank you.
Good. Next question. And we're running low on time, so please keep your questions to the point.
Good evening. My name is Tawana Williams, Newark resident. I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Systemic equality will never exist in a broad national educational system when it does not exist in the current Constitution of this United States. We were never meant to count all these years still. We all know that it takes a village to raise a child. Once the village was burnt down, so were the hope and the aspirations of the people.
That's right.
This is going back to 40 acres in a mule, back to the 1860s. They were never held accountable. How is it that and then when we got ourselves together after that, what they do, bring drugs in our community, and they bombed us. They bombed the thriving communities and took all we had and killed us. We still got ourselves together after that, threw more drugs and stuff on top of us. How do you come up out of that if you don't start with legislation, if you don't tell the truth? And this history book that the sister was talking about, it's never been written, sis. Never. Do you know how far back in time you're going to have to go? It's wrong. We live in a wrong country, and we're seeing the evidence of that now. And that's why it's affecting everyone, not just our communities. Secondly, I'm the proud parent of 2 children. I'm educated in New York public school systems. My daughter attended Weequahic High School. She graduated in 2008. There was an indoctrination period going on when Mr. Baraka was there as the vice principal. In order to teach the kids who they were, he had to make up a class called Freshman Seminar. And it was taught by this brother standing behind me, all under the guise of keeping it together under educational guidelines, right? But even though my child was an honor student, she received a 4-year full-ride scholarship to Shaw University in North Carolina, which was the first black college started in the United States in 1865, the year of emancipation. We tight, we together, we just got to get them off our backs.
Well, thank you.
Majuti to Bakari, a teacher here in East Orange.
I'm in East Orange.
East Orange. We got other teachers here from East Orange and Newark. We're glad to see them here as well. We got to have questions from them. But
they won't let me in Newark.
We bounced them out.
Hey, man, some validity to that.
Yeah. I got a 2-part question. Peace. The American educational system was last overhauled in the 20s by a man named Dewey. At that time, the educational system was built on a factory model where 80% of students actually failed. They dropped out or even only went to grade school, but they went to work in a factory, so they made a living. That system is still in effect.
Yes.
Now it's 50 to 60% failures, dropout academies and all that stuff, and those dropouts or failures still go to work in a factory. They just call it prison. At what point do we attack? And it's interesting what you said in the 1860s, because the public school system was actually built by Africans who was emancipated. They built it. So now, at what point do we attack this as war and rebuild the public food system and make it a school system to work for us? That's question number one. Question number two, in that rebuilding, why can't we do what the charter schools do? For example, Newark, East Orange, Irvington, which are all under de facto segregation. It's only black folks, and Raz made the point, it's only us here. We have already built in the ability to take these schools over. Take them over, put in place the curriculum, put in place the financial fiscal structure, put in place all the things we need based on the students' needs, the community's needs, the family needs, and produce successful, intelligent students because they have it. What we have in place is black folks teaching a white Eurocentric curriculum. So at what point do we revolutionize and go to war for the sake of education? Whew.
I just want to say ditto.
I wanted to add, in my opening comment, I was getting ready to talk about, do we use the charter school movement as a strategy to create the kind of schools that we want, as opposed to some... Well, no, it'll be our money if we control that school.
Can I answer? Can I get into that?
No, listen to what I'm saying. I think that's the point that he was trying to make. Could we, if we took the intellectual capital in the room and we had an agenda, could we use their own system to create some models of success? That's all I'm saying. Could we?
I would like to say now we're finally thinking. The brother said, at what point? Right now. Get this opportunity scholarship act, get school choice in here, and then all of us who are capable of teaching our children, we teach our children. That's the issue. It's no more complicated than that. Whatever works. Malcolm X said, by any means necessary. All we need is the funding. You say you have the expertise, I believe it. You certainly have it in Camden, but we need the funders to make it work. So we started right now. This is the point. The point is today.
We already got the funding. Can I respond to that? Sure. We got the funding. Okay. We just have to be careful. You know, I mean, Mussolini made the trains run on time, right? So, you just be careful what you ask for. You know, you can have some kind of. You want efficacy, you just got to be careful. We don't want fascism with that either. So what's clear is that we can't have a passive-aggressive kind of approach to it. Like, we don't want to have a political head-on approach to what's going on. The money is our money. It belongs to us. The schools are our schools. The children are our children. The people on that school board or advisory board, whatever, were elected by the people of this community, unless you're going to give it to somebody else. All of this stuff is our stuff. We have not gotten the will like they did before to take it, to do. That's what I was saying about G2AUC, and maybe there's some things I might not agree with completely, but the fundamental part of it is that the idea that the schools belong to the people is real. So the money is ours, all of this belongs to us. Take that, and once we begin to get these parents and these community folks in these schools and dictate what happens in this place, that's the only time, to me, that's the only way it's going to work, is to back these people up and make them understand that the power begins with you and your family and your community. And we need to go in there, even if we got to seize some schools. And it may sound radical from a council person, but I believe that. And ultimately, these things need to happen, and we need to go to war with that. What Brother Otto said is very correct. The political economy and they teach you this when you get in the master's, you know. The political economy in America today is the political economy always dictated how the schools were organized. Always dictated how the schools were organized. They were still organized on a factory model, when in a neoliberal neoliberalism, globalization kind of society, where the factories and service industry has been shipped all overseas for super profit, and now you have kids, and back then, people could graduate from high school with a diploma and go work at a factory or drop out and work at a factory and make more money or equal amounts of money the person who went to the university. Some of the times the college students had less money than workers who actually left school to go to work because they made a decision for their family. I got to go get money as opposed to get an education to support my family. Now that those jobs are gone, there's nothing for people to do, and the cities have taken the place of these factories in the county and hire all these people to get city jobs, county jobs, state jobs, and now the city and the state and the county don't want to hire any of these people anymore, so there's nothing to do with them. So they go to prison, like you said, and so does their children. So there's a greater pressure put on the public school system to work now, to actually do something, because all these people should be in the private sector. But there's not even enough jobs in the private sector. So the whole idea is a lie. You know, the whole idea is really a lie. So we take it over.
So the question becomes, even if you were thinking about, if we argue that that's the method, that that's the strategy, and we think about employing that is some kind of method of taking over the educational system, some people argue that that's vouchers, some people argue that that's charter schools. But if we think about it from all schools, all kids, everybody got to be educated. If we think about that way, what is the answer become to that question? Is one of the people from last time said, is marching and protest and rally, is that the solution? What actually brings about the transformation that you're talking about and we're talking about? That's what we need to get to. How do we actually do that?
I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm talking about going into the school and taking the school. That's what I'm talking about. It has nothing to do with vouchers. It has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It has to do with the fact that the school belongs to you. It's in your community. If it was in somebody else's neighborhood and the school wasn't working, the parents would be all in the school. Trust and believe that the parents are being in schools. At some point in our history, the institutions in our community were forced to educate our children because the state refused to. Now that we fought for at least legal inclusion in what's going on, the next step is to seize power in these neighborhoods. And that's basically what it is. That's what G2A, you see him talked about. Even if people have to go in there and say, we're not leaving, we're going to have a 24-hour teacher-thon and do what we need to do to seize back what's going on. Go to those board meetings and say, we're going to do this curriculum and not that curriculum. We're going to have this curriculum and not, we're going to have this superintendent and not that superintendent. We're going to have these teachers and not this teacher. You have to take control.
But now let's push that. How do we, and I think that the Abbott leadership is trying to work on some of this, because they want to know, how do we actually get those parents to the board meeting? How do we get those parents engaged in ways that are actually doing those things so that the parents themselves take the ownership in the education? Because we got a lot of parents who just won't go. How do we get them to come and do what you're talking about?
Early on, we talked about we have to build a movement around education, around neighborhood schools. Right. So you don't even have to leave your community. Where your neighborhood is, act like you own the school.
That's the choice right there.
And I say do both. I say do both. We don't have to set up a false dichotomy. We don't have to take over schools or have vouchers. We can do both. I'm saying I want whatever works. Malcolm gave us the formula. By any means necessary, get my kids taught.
The dichotomy is not false.
It is a false dichotomy. Why can you not do both? Why can you not take over the public schools? And
because the real choice is to be, the choice we always fought for is to have a school system in our own community that worked for us, that we were in control of.
Let's do that.
Even in Brown v. Board, it wasn't about going to school with white people. It was about going to school in my neighborhood, which was convenient for me, and because the educated, the people in that school, and it was controlled by white folks, and I'm just telling what the facts is. And the state put the resources in there because their children went to school there. We thought that if we went into school with them, that they would stay there and the resources would remain. Those people left those schools and took those resources with them and left us in this community with nothing. And that's exactly what happened. And when Negroes got an opportunity to do it, they did the same thing. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
I just want to say...
Go ahead, and then we're going to go back to the next question.
That we talked about the system being organized in particular ways that fundamentally are not about creating equality or equity, right? Like historically, you don't have to do the math to know that we have a system that is organized not to
develop the black community.
To develop the black community, to give us equality, to give us equity, to give us resources, to give us all of those things. That is our history. And so whatever the direction is, we have to think about how do we do this with intentionality to always consistently addressing that fact. And unless we do that, then we will again be coming back to the same conversation regardless of what it is you put in place. Because that's the fundamental problem, is the way that the society...
And this is the last thing I'd like to say to the people. I call it the analogy of the drowning children, or the parable of the drowning children. Imagine yourself on a shore, and you're looking at your children, other people's children on the ocean drowning, because that's what's happening in my community. My community is genocide going on. For me to say I don't want choice is to say, my kids are drowning, but I only want a U.S. Coast Guard boat to pick them up. Let me tell you something, I don't care what boat picks them up. It could be a canoe, it could be a speedboat, it could be a tugboat. Pick my kids up and get my kids to shore. You see what I'm saying? And that's the whole school choice debate. As long as it ain't a slave ship. Malcolm told us, by any means necessary, whatever works. If you militate against that for your children, I got to wonder about what your motivation is. How can you militate against whatever works for my kids or for your kids?
So I just want to say that there is evidence about what works for our kids and what works in our schools. And I think that whatever it is, that we have to base our decision-making and our direction on the evidence that is out there. And unless we do that, we're going to continue to perpetuate.
And if it works, support it. If it doesn't work, drop it. Whether it's public, private, or whatever.
All right, let me move on to the next question. Next question, young man, young brother, go ahead.
Hi, everybody.
Introduce yourself.
How's everybody doing? I want to know, well, my school needs more notebooks and books. My school needs more money. The North Public School System needs a lot of help. That's what I think, because based on what Roger Rocker was saying about the North Public School System, like, it's a shame how we felony tested and everything. I think we can step it up a lot better. I want to thank everybody and have a good day.
All right, man.
My name is Asamar Nash.
Very good,
What
brother.
school does he go to?
Very good.
What school do you go to?
What school you go to, buddy? What school do you go to?
Oh, Dayton Street School. Dayton Street, okay. Just want to know where.
You don't have nothing in common with what the people you say, Barack Obama or Cory Booker? You go to public school.
My name is Lev.
That is a
Zerbermans. Okay, just so you know,
If you could please hold down the additional comments, we can't hear everybody.
my name is Lev Zerbermans. I'm a class of 93 alumnus of this school, and I'm also a product of the Abington Public Schools, which I attended in, between 1975 and 1979. Okay, now this is what I would like to know. I have a few points I would like to ask. Since we are getting $100 million courtesy of Facebook and all the famous celebrities and politicians, several points. Number one, I would like to know how you are going to prevent bigotry and racism in schools. Just recently, a 13-year-old kid died because she was bullied. Also, a Rutgers New Brunswick freshman recently graduated from high school, died by jumping off the George Washington Bridge. How are you going to prevent bigotry on one hand and give quality education on another? That's first. Secondly,
I'm going to have to have you use one. There's a whole bunch of people who don't have a lot of time, so I'll be able to just take one question from you. All right. Anybody want to address that?
I know.
Right. I don't know exactly what he was saying.
I think if I summarize part of it, he's trying to suggest that, there's this money coming into the city. How do we expect what is that going for, and how is it going to benefit the students?
Do you know?
We don't know that yet.
Yeah. We don't know.
We don't know his answer. So the answer is that we don't know how that's going to play itself out yet. Okay. Next question, please.
Put it on Facebook. Find out. See if he knows.
Good evening. My name is Adela Kareem Donaldson. I am a native Newarker. I've been in the public school system and working in the community all my life. So I have a question that I'd like to pose to everyone on the panel. How do you see yourself as being a profound solution to rebuilding the education foundation for Black and Latino youth? Say it again. How do you see yourself as being a profound solution to rebuilding the education foundation for Black and Latino youth?
Good question.
Anybody want to take a shot at it?
Well, I've helped over 40 young brothers from the city of Camden who didn't even know college existed get into college. I'm taking a group of 9 to Beijing in July to open up their heads. And I'm also writing a history book because I'm a history major. And I'm very excited about that book because it's very brief, but it gets our history in a unique fashion that young people can understand. So I hope I'll be able to affect the culture. God willing, I will be able to.
Yeah, one of the things I'm trying to do as mayor is when I fund youth programs like Pop One and Little League, all those things, I require those organizations to have an academic component to their recreation. So report cards, looking at the impact the sport may have on their schoolwork. If they're underperforming, I don't want the kids to participate. I think once their grades come back up, we ask them to have the kids come back and participate. The other thing is we're trying to invest in after-school programs. We've taken a whole bunch of federal money that we lobbied for effectively to open up after-school programs to support young people after school. There are some basic things that poor children just don't have, like a place to do their homework at home sometimes. And creating those spaces which help them do those kinds of things. And we have certified teachers working with them after school. So in my community where I can have some impact around some of the educational outcomes that impact young people, those are some of the things that we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to respond to that before we move on?
Yeah, I haven't even done the minuscule amount of things that I need to be doing in terms of trying to help our children get out of this situation. I'm a principal every day. I've been given the opportunity with Dr. Wells to create a space where we can begin to take control of schools in our neighborhood in the Central Ward. I think that that's an exciting kind of thing. It's not nearly enough, or not even what we envision should happen. We still got, like I said, Negroes in the way and other folks who are preventing us from doing exactly what it is that we need to do completely and totally. I try to mentor and talk to as many young people as I possibly can my entire life, so I try to do that, but to me it's simply, it's not enough, and what I do as an individual is not nearly more than what we should be doing as a collective to try to get and my work as an individual won't impact profoundly, you used, the kind of work that we need to do unless I impact somebody individually and they find a way to bring us together collectively to do the things that we need to do to get us out of this situation that we're in.
But I think that, so when this work is successful, and it will never be done, and I have absolutely no doubt that the work that I'm doing with Mr. Baraka and 6 other very committed, very strong, very engaged, very powerful principals who absolutely want to see the best things possible happen for children, that I think that we will have a very systemic impact on the way in which people understand how you can fundamentally transform schools so that they meet the needs of our kids and our communities and become centers of those places, and really, wherever it is, whether it's Oakland, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Atlanta, whether it's Memphis, you could name any number of places where we are the majority. And I think that this work is going to fundamentally raise some critical questions in the current debates about how do you change schools.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of things that we have to think about in terms of how those transformations take place, because there's, if you look at McClymonds High School in Oakland, you mentioned Oakland, I did some work with them many years ago, but they had an African-centered component there in the high school itself. Wade Nobles was running this piece, and they had resistance from the teachers and the folks, and they had that office space, they had staffing, and until we transform the minds of those folks who often are us, who are willing to think and do things differently, then that's the only place where the systemic place is going to happen. They had the books, they had the institutionalization, but they still had individuals that you talk about who are still antithetical to that, who are antithetical to change. It means that you have to be willing to do something different to get a different outcome. Right? Everybody involved has to be willing to do something different. Even the parents have to be willing to think and see differently to bring about different outcomes. And so those are the things that we need to think about. We have time for, we'll take the rest of those questions, and then I know Mr. Baraka wanted to ask some questions, so we're going to bring the mic up with him and go from there. So your question is up now.
I tell you, it's not just a question. I wanted to give, I think, a clarification first to my question. First, do you all realize how this period we're living in is exactly like the Reconstruction period? Do you understand that? After the Emancipation Proclamation, which was in 1863, not 1865, but after the Emancipation Proclamation, the slaves thought they were free. You understand? In the next 40 years, everything that they're supposed to got in the Emancipation Proclamation, they took away. You see what I'm saying? 40 acres and a mule. The Klan came after emancipation. Black codes came after emancipation. What did the ex-slaves bring to the South? Democracy and public education. You understand? And so this question of what's happening in the schools, for you to say public schools are never any good, is very short-sighted. Because most of us historically have gotten out of public school. The question is this, just like in Reconstruction, when they destroyed what the ex-slaves had built, that's what they're doing now. 1954 is when private schools become important, because it was Brown versus the Board of Education, and blacks then were supposed to be let into public schools, so they destroyed the public schools. These public schools here in Newark were good schools until black people got in power, you see, and then they withdrew all the money, all the funds out of these schools. So you have to know history to actually to deal with the present. The second thing is state takeover. If this foundation says that Newark has the highest percentage of black male graduates of any city in the United States, then what is the question, where is the state takeover? What is the state takeover for? You know, what has been the state takeover? That's the second question. The third question is charter schools. If you got charter schools, get private money. You see, but you should not start no charter schools with or beleaguered public funds. That's the only problem I have. And charter schools fundamentally are a project of these hedge funds and private bankers who see education as a growth product. I know the brother who started 3Es, Olusu Sudoku. He used to be a revolutionary. I don't know how he got over that. But the point is that the question is that charter schools is not going to solve our problem. That's what I'm saying. If you spend $17 million, how much do we spend? $76 million this year on charter schools in Newark? We need that money in public education. If you want a charter school, solid. Get charter funding. Go get some private funding. And the last thing is, I think the most important thing is, do you all understand the antagonistic contradiction between public need and private profit? Right. See, that's fundamentally what you're facing. And whenever public need threatens private profit, public need will be thrown under the bus. You understand what I'm saying? And the last thing is that $100 million is for us. The $100 million is to control and to build charter schools. That's what it's for. It's to took the superintendent out. You know, he's going to start firing the best principals we got. You understand? And the $100 million, well, what is that? What is that money? Where does it come from? Why Cory Booker? Why Newark? You understand? I would tell you Corey's history, but it would be on television. It would only be one sentence. But that's my last question. We will never see that $100 million. You understand? It is not for the people of Newark. It is to control education in Newark, and that's what it is.
All right. We got two more people. Yeah, three more people for questions, and then we're gonna close it out because it is a little past our time. So we'll.
Good evening to the panel. I'd like to commend the brother that's been in the system for 41 years. Yes, God bless you. I know you had a struggle, but we still need you. My question is, who make decisions in hiring people? I've been around over 60 years. My wife just spoke. We've been in the public system over 60 years. We raised our children here. They went to the public schools. They also went to Sister Clyde Muhammad School, did the University of Islam at that time. But my question is, who hire these people? Who appoint these people? That's not a part of our communities. Who hire these people? They don't have no concern about what we're doing in our communities. We have seen over 60 years that the morale of the system, of the people in the system, was destroyed. The police department, the school system, we have seen the people actually made, and not only that, we know this to be a fact because I have a daughter-in-law that works in the public school. She's a principal. The teachers are taking an early retirement. And why? We need these people because you have over 100 years of history right here on the panel right here. So it got to be something that we need to look at. And we need a coalition of good government that people have compassion and respect for human life, and we don't have that today. So we need to get back to the old way of doing things by having people that have respect for life. It's not just about the money. I'm a grandfather and a great-grandfather. And my concern is what we're going to do as far as educating our children and what kind of legacy we're going to have for our children. You follow what I'm saying? What kind of legacy we're going to leave for our children? We have educators here, and they're getting paid big money. But I don't see no changes in the school system since I came out of school. That's been in the 60s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we get to the answers, let me just make an announcement real quick that NJBIC is having their conference this next week, October 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then they're also honoring our former president, Dr. Isaac Uyamba, on Friday. So if you're interested in attending, you can check out their website, or you can talk to John Smith before he leaves. Panelists, any comments, thoughts about what he said, or
the hiring of teachers?
Yeah.
I mean, there's whole groups of organizations now that bring teachers into urban America. So from Teach for America to Teacher Next to all these programs that are designed to bring teachers into urban America. Most of them have been educated to be a part of these charter schools or part of public schools. They even talk about building housing for teachers who decide to teach in charter schools. I mean, this whole thing is like ridiculous. But the real idea of it is that most of our kids will always be in public school. Right, and so to drain and steal and take away and beleaguer public schools and demean them is meaning that the majority of the kids will always have less. Like you're creating a tiered school system, and we don't need to create a further tiered school system. We already got regular public schools and then magnet schools, which the inequity there by itself is ridiculous. The level of inequity between the magnet school and regular public school is outrageous. I mean, even without the other folks getting involved in that. And then that's a whole another meeting about how the access and resources that they have at other schools, just curriculum and the ability to make decisions at university high, at science high. And people say these things, they're like, because these schools are successful, we give them more freedom, which is ridiculous to me because the schools that have been unsuccessful are unsuccessful because they lack the kind of freedom to make the choices that they need to make to be able to make the school successful. So the kind of tiered system that I think is going to be created out of these vouchers and these other things and so forth and so on, because most of our kids will always be in public school, and the state will never give you enough money to send all of your kids to a private school. And I'm going to tell you this, if all of your kids was to go to a private school, those people in private school are getting ready to get out of there, or they're going to ask for a voucher soon enough because they want their kids to go to another school. So, because if your kids are going to a private school, to a parochial school or some other school where they're charging them money and the state is giving you $5,000 and you got 4 or 5 kids, the real school, then you get to higher access. What about Pingree and St. Mark's and all these other private schools that have all this other lavish thing that costs $25,000 a year? Why, if I'm living in a suburban community, can't I get a voucher that send my kid there? Why don't I ask for a voucher next? Where's my voucher? If I live in Livingston and I don't got enough money to send my kid to Newark Academy across the street, can I get a voucher too? Where's the democracy in that?
The idea of starting a movement around our schools is critical. You asked about who does the hiring. Well, one, the Board of Education does, but there are 2 basic things that I think community people can do. One, I think that there's encouragement here that people need to be engaged at their school board level so they know what kind of people are coming into their schools. But you won't know until you go into the schools to see what the performance is in the classroom. There are enough of us around as a community that are retired, that could actually go in and sit there and monitor teachers and look at the performance that's going on in the classroom. But the political will to do that kind of activity as a community is what we have not developed yet. And so one of the thoughts that should come out of this, how do we really get into a process where we look at those people that we hire and as a community evaluate whether or not, and there are a couple of things. Raz talked about the magnet schools. I remember when I went to Newark Public Schools, they had the equivalent of gifted and talented classes. So they segued kids for a long time in public education. Those kids that they viewed as achievers were put in the class with a group of other people that they thought perform at the same level. So it's easier to educate that group of kids. So this political economy has always segued out those who they thought could achieve and those that are marginal, or et cetera. So we have a challenge about how do we get a performance level out of all of our kids. Now I'm going to really say something controversial and I'm shut up. I don't believe testing measures intelligence.
It doesn't. I agree with that.
Yeah. And so I think her theory about what is education and what is schooling is a real philosophical debate that as a community we have to have. We're telling our kids that they are stupid because they didn't pass a test that probably isn't relevant to their lives or culturally sensitive to what they're testing for in the first place. So we stigmatize our own kids. So the slave master wasn't designed to free the slave. So, the challenge for us is how do we do those things in a real aggressive manner that gives us a mindset of freedom? And so other people educate their own kids in addition to sending them to the public school.
Right.
And so do we develop a model outside of the public school institution where we have committed African-American, Latino educators who are retired, who are getting a decent pension, who are willing to help? Do we organize ourselves in a way to provide, do our places that we support, whether they are houses of worship or our fraternities, or whatever organizational framework that you put yourselves into, do we force those institutions to do the things for our kids that need to be happening in addition to agitating and fighting for the things that we pay for? And the last thing I want to say is this. There's another public discussion that's happening right now around the country is how do we fund education? I was at a meeting with a bunch of government officials just the other day. There's a whole movement to try to take the educational process off the property tax rolls. What implications does that have for us? One of the conversations we had yesterday was, well, if we go to an income tax and a sales tax model to fund education, that's really regressive for poor people. They want to take the property tax road. I mean, there's a government discussion going on right now. It ain't active yet, but people are crying about property taxes. You hear that New Jersey has the highest property tax in the nation. You got a governor that's trumpeting that. And so people are now saying, well, maybe we shouldn't fund public education or property taxes anymore. Maybe we should look at some other ways. So first, the conversation I had the other day was, well, if we go to a sales tax and a an income tax model, poor folks going to make, and they're going to make out. They're going to get hit. So a lot of people don't know that there's this whole major policy discussion about how we do a whole bunch of things around education, and we got to get in the game in those debates, or we're going to be looking at a whole another thing that we didn't even thought about.
And those debates are across systems, right? It's not just education, it's healthcare, it's all of the systems. Yes. And I think that even in terms of our solutions, we have to think intersectional about the system so that we can push against all of them at the same time.
I'm going to say this, and I'm done for the evening. I have to go right back to Camden. Number one, I had 2 children of my own. One I sent to public school. Of course, she did very well in public school. The other I sent to Morristown Friends because he wasn't doing so well in public school. Praise God, I had the ability to make that choice. I don't see how anybody could be for health care and want the public option in health care and not want the private option in education. That's somewhat incoherent. It's the same force. And all I'm saying is I got skin in the game. I had 2 children, but I had 12 children living in my house. Me and my wife stopped that now, but over the years, my children we had 12 neighborhood kids. Genocide is not acceptable to us. When you're losing 6 and 7 and 8 out of 10 kids to drop out, those people go to prison, poverty, and pain. Genocide is the annihilation of a given group of people. I graduated Camden High in 1972. Trust me when I tell you, the Camden school systems are not what they were when I was there. And I am not, as a man, going to accept the genocide. I'm taking the Malcolm method, which is by any means necessary, by every means necessary. If public works, we love public. If it doesn't, shut it down. If private works, we love private. If it doesn't, shut it down. But what's really going to happen is going to be an amalgamation of public, private, religious, and every other thing, all hands on deck to deal with this genocide. That's just common sense. Beg your pardon? And, well, let me get this last thing. Unless you want to end the Pell Grant, that's public money going to religious schools. Unless you want to end the Pell Grant, that argument is incoherent. Because the Pell Grant, I can go to Notre Dame, which is religious and private, or I can go to Rutgers. And that's a great system. Whatever works to save our children. Genocide is not acceptable to a man. And we experience genocide in our community. Well, 2 things. One is that primary and secondary school is compulsory, so it's slightly different on one level. But the other thing that I think that we've been leaving out of the discussion as we weave our way through all these different things is that when you look at the school system, you look at change and transformation, something that was really popular to talk about in the 80s has disappeared, and that's tracking. Right? Tracking still happens through all the different ways, but people don't talk about its influence on education and educational differentiation. So that's another piece that we need to not ignore, but think about how its role in influencing education. We have 2 questions left, and then we have to call it a night. Yes.
I'm sorry, and
I apologize for the panel for being wrong.
We apologize.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, and listening to everybody, I just became so damn angry. I mean, I'm sitting here, and I had a question, but now it's a comment. Because somebody came up here and asked what was going to happen to the $100 million, and y'all said, I don't know. And nobody else was like, why don't you know? Who knows? If I have to go home right now and tell my son, because he told me before I left, he said, ask them what they're going to do with our money. When I go home, I'm going to have to tell him that we don't know. I am so tired.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do with it.
Wait, I am so tired of us not holding people accountable. This is our mayor. This is our money for our children. I am tired of us not holding people accountable, going out on the street and calling people out. Our kids, like he said, are dying. They have no education. They don't know what I used to know when I was a child. What is going on? We need to go out there and tell him, listen, what is going to happen to this money? And if you go on Oprah again, we're going to be outside of Oprah saying that you ain't do shit with that money. And be for real about it. Because we all know that this is just a discussion at the end of the day. When we leave out here, what we going to do? What we going to do? I'm tired of talking. That $100 million is ours. We can't just sit idly by and say, oh, let him do whatever he want to do. He did that with other money. Hold him accountable and say, damn it, don't go on no other else. We can't just talk. I'm tired of talking. Go ahead, do something. Do something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm like this. I wasn't like this over there, but I'm tired. I love these kids. I'm tired of talking.
Sister, we need and we need your energy to come and bring about the change that you're talking. We gotta take that energy and make something happen. You are the solution. You gotta be one of the people who comes and makes things happen. So each one of us has a responsibility to do something.
I understand your frustration.
We keep our kids home for our own children and show the economy, everybody. Where is that? That's it.
I think it's important that we have this discussion, though. I'll tell you that. This is where we're headed. This is deep discussion. That's the most radical thing. The problem with the $100 million that it isn't our money, really. We gave it to Cory Booker to do what he wanted to do with it. So
he can't do that unless we allow him to.
I agree with that.
We also need to know that it's not just $100 million. It's not that money. The school's board money is, what is it, $700 million or $800 million? That's the money. Close to $900 million. That's the money you need to be worried about, sister. $900 million is almost $1 billion is the education budget.
Which is why we got all of the wagons. Which is why we got all of the wagons circling around here. And they got the people in front of us that look like us, supporting the wagons that's circling the money, because there are school systems in New Jersey that are not working. Like, nobody is asking, where's the school reform movement in Lyndhurst, New Jersey? Like, Lyndhurst, New Jersey is a failing school system that is in Abbott. There's no wagons circling around Lyndhurst because the pot in Lyndhurst is considerably smaller than the pot in Newark. But there's wagons circling around Newark because there is some money there that people want a hold of. And the other flip side of that is there are people who believe that they're giving their money to Newark to kids who can't learn anyway. And I think the point that was missed, that my father was saying historically, is that the public school was not a failure. Weequay was the #1 school in the nation. You understand what I'm saying? When Weequay High School was the #1 school in the nation. It wasn't until, that Ken Gibson became the mayor and, black folks started to go into that community and the things started to change and everybody left and the superstructure fell that the school began to devolve, to get worse and worse and worse and worse because the political will to make the school #1 also left. With that, and you had people who sent their kids there who were unemployed, who didn't come from rich families, whose families weren't doctors and lawyers and all these specific things, who didn't have the same political connections or clout. So the school system went the way of the people who actually went there, of workers who had no power and no jobs. And until we empower people in this community to have employment, to have dignity, to have respect, and put them in power in these schools, then the school system is going to look the way they want to look. This whole thing about choice, to me, everybody don't have the same choice. So to say that is disingenuous. Like, it's disingenuous because, listen, everybody is not going to be able to send their kid to Morristown Beard. Even if you got a voucher from this place or a voucher from that place, there are going to be kids still. If you're really talking about democracy, then we have to struggle for democracy and stop being passive aggressive or stop, trying to go in the end around and say, I'm for this, and really I want the money, But the real thing is, if you want education for all of the kids, then you fix the system that all of the kids are in, right? And the majority of kids are in the public school system. Then we fight like cats and dogs until we get the public school system to resemble what we want it to resemble. All right, thanks.
We got one. I don't know, sister. Let's see if I can work you in. We got one more question at least, and maybe two. Go ahead, Shakira.
My question is,
you got to make it because we're way over time, and we're going to get kicked out of the building in a little while.
How do we bring greater involvement and transparency to the public school system? Involvement in the community, of the community, and transparency. Like what I'm saying, for example, let's say I want to do a youth program at some high school and they close the computer labs and libraries at 5 because nobody's there. But at 5 o'clock when I get off work, I want to do a program there, and I think that the public school funding built the library, built the computer lab, but I can't get in it. So how do we fix these problems to make and get together parents in the school, all the programs, actively using the resources that supposedly are ours?
The bold approach.
Anybody want to address that?
Not to mention tracking that $100 million.
Dr. Wells, you've been put on the spot.
I think the work that we've started to do with Central High School and the 6 other schools is ultimately going to do that. As Mr. Baraka has said, there's a lot of challenges to getting there, but we are bringing parents into the schools. We are bringing community-based organizations into the schools. We are bringing people out of the schools into the community, and I think the biggest piece is fundamentally changing the ways in which schools relate to our kids and our families and our communities, and making it, we do a lot of attacking parents, right? We do a lot of talking about parents don't do this, parents don't do that, but a parent who is spending a day trying to get resources that they need for their kid while their kid is at school is actually being a parent. And so we have to really fundamentally change the way in which we deal with our communities.
Okay. All right, last question. Make it brief.
Hi, good night. My name is Trina McCall. Thank everybody for a wonderful panel. I guess as a parent, I'm a parent of 3, and I put 2 through private school. I did public school. I did private school as well as I homeschooled. And those are options I just want to share that I chose because I was dealing with all of this as a young parent. I got one left. She goes to a private school. I pay for her. Unemployed. 2.5 years, only by the grace of God. Now, I just want to, please let me say this really quick. As a parent, I will say to all parents, it's up to us to organize ourselves and speak to these people that you got to understand that this is not, everybody's talk black, white, but everybody understands green. Somebody's going to step to the side if it's black and white, and then there's that gray. But everybody understands green. And you keep your kids home and stop letting them treat us like we're the still goes cattle. And it's like, that's where the power is. But when parents got to read, parents got to pay attention, and got to stand up for really, because we got something in common. We want to see our children do well. And when you keep them home to keep that and tell a principal, because the principal, every time you get an absence, they technically not supposed to get money for that day, the child not being in school. But if you don't understand the system that is governing you, then there's no way you can really stand up and say what Mr. Baraka said and trust that parents are going to make the best decisions in the interest of their children.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond? Well, I know there's still some questions and still some hands. I'm sorry, Sister Whitney. The panel has been very generous in staying much longer than really what they've been asked to do. I'll be real brief. You have to. I know that there's other people in the audience who want to. If I let you go,
I do want to say this. I know there's no representation there on the panel from the union, at all. My name is Annette Alston. I'm president of the New York Teachers Association, which is an affiliate of NJEA. And I feel like since there's no representation, I hope you will bear with me for a moment.
Make it quick, please.
I grew up in the New York public school system, and I'm a product of that. I recognize that there are bad teachers and there are very great teachers. Absolutely. And I think that right now what's happening is that there's this focus and this smoke screen and mirrors as far as our New York public schools are concerned. You don't see the progress that we have made in the past 15 years through Abbott, the preschools, the kindergartners are excelling, are actually reading on a first grade level now by the time they leave. There has been so much progress in the past 10, 15 years in the New York school system. Nobody wants to talk about that because they want to talk about how bad things are and how bad the teachers are. And yes, there may be some room for improvement, but the unions are not the problem. And they need to stop acting like they are. Unions do protect
and make sure teachers have due process, but they also make sure the teachers are trained. There are workshops that are put forth because of the unions. There are many things that are happening in education because of the unions. NJEA, and I'm just going to say this very quickly, is one of the strongest unions in the country, but we also have one of the best education systems in the country. And that's not a coincidence, okay? So we need to understand that. We need to work together. We need to stop fighting one another. We need to recognize that we have to do what's best for all of our children. Okay. All right, and that's really what I want to say, and I think there needs to be further conversation on this. And I don't think the answer to is keeping kids out of school. I know how frustrated parents are, but we need to work together, and don't keep your kids out of school because they need to be in school. That's where we learn.
Thank you. Let's give everybody a round of applause, please. I think this is a great panel, a great discussion. I want to thank, before they walk out of here, I want to thank Mayor Wayne Smith, I want to thank Michael Daniels, Councilman Las Baraka, Keith Benson, Dr. Lauren Wells, and I want to thank my staff, Bajai Kweli, Kanju Briggs, and Devin Young. Thank all of you for coming and participating. It's been a great opportunity to have a discussion, and we'll see you next time.